Lions Nation, what is going on? Welcome into the Lions Pulse. I am your host, Miko, and we are here once again to talk all things Detroit Lions. Today is a really good day. I'm feeling really good. Starting a little bit later than I normally do, and I'm not even gonna lie to you guys again, always trying to keep it, transparent and honest with you guys. I got off of work, and anybody else ever taking like one of those post-work naps? I'm thinking like I'm gonna rest for about an hour or so and then, start to get ready for the show tonight or the stream tonight. And like that did not happen, right? I literally hit my bed and I was out. And by the time I woke up, it was already like 5 minutes to 6. And I was like, shoot, like I gotta scramble, get stuff together. So a little bit later than I normally am, but I didn't want to skip out on streaming today. We have a really interesting topic for you guys. And yeah, hopefully we can have some really good dialogue, a little good back and forth. Last stream that we had over on Monday was awesome. You guys brought so many great questions and so many great just back and forth and really, just I don't know, it was a fun experience all around. So really looking forward to having that same type of engagement. But before we jump into today's topic, before we get really started, for those of you that are new, appreciate you coming by the channel. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also be sure to hit that notification bell. That way you can know anytime I go live, anytime I upload a video, which I do occasionally from time to time. So again, super, really appreciative of that. That really helps out the channel. Also be sure to hit the like button as you guys kind of come in. And then once you guys kind of finish that whole process, jump in the chat like my guy Grit, jumping in the chat, dropping the blue heart, the lion emoji, and the lion football. Also in the chat right now, we got 1991 Mac Stack saying, "What's good, fam? What's good with you, Mac?" Dude, like I said, I'm feeling good. I'm coming off of a nap, so I got some good energy. And I think I'm gonna need it for this topic. You know, again, if you see the title, if you saw the thumbnail, I'm sure some of you are thinking like, man, Miko's been talking so good about the Lions, the last few streams, the last few weeks. Honestly, like most of this offseason, I haven't had a whole lot of negative things to say, but I think it was a few weeks ago. I think it definitely dropped when I was on vacation. This narrative started to kind of circulate around the lines about the possibility of them being overhyped. Are they being overrated? Are people, jumping on the bandwagon too soon? Considering that this team hasn't done a whole lot, leading into the season. And so obviously when I got back, I had a number of other things that I wanted to talk about. I obviously had a couple guests, and then obviously just wanted to get into the swing of streaming again. But this was a topic that I did want to tackle because as you guys will kind of get to know this about me, again, probably as the season goes on, I sometimes can be a little pessimistic about the Lions. I can sometimes have a moment where I myself want to pump the brakes and want to slow down my own hype train because again, always trying to, for me personally, I'm always trying to stay even keel as a fan, right? I'm never trying to get too high. I'm never trying to get too low because I understand that at the end of the day, watching sports should be fun. And I think sometimes when watching sports becomes, less fun is when, our expectations get too lofty and we get too over our skis and now we're disappointed. And so I try to put myself in situations where I'm not going to be disappointed. And so the clip or the I guess the quote that really kind of like springboarded this whole conversation was that from Emmanuel Acho over at FS1. I think the show's I honestly can't remember what the show is called, but Acho basically they were having a segment on the show and they were basically like asking the question like, yo, which teams are the most overhyped? And so I believe Joy and another panelist on the show basically went with the Jets. LaShawn McCoy went with the Dolphins, and Acho chose the Lions. Shout out to Dr. Paparoni. Love it. Like you guys come up with some really good like YouTube names. Dr. Paparoni saying speak for yourself. Thank you. I knew the word speak was in it. I just couldn't remember like the rest of it. Dr. Paparoni also saying took one of them old man naps, Miko. Listen, man, them naps come in clutch. Once you get like post like after like 25, those naps come in so clutch if you expect to be like productive for the rest of your day. So, I'm always, I'm always down for a good nap. And that's honestly like not even like an old man thing. Like I used to do that back in like high school. Like I would get out of school before I would do anything else, like go take a nap and then, finish out the rest of my day. But I digress. Uh, so yeah, Acho was on, Speak for Yourself, his show Speak for Yourself, and he basically had pegged the Lions as the team that he deemed the most overhyped. And at face value, I saw a lot of people, like, again, I think I was on vacation at the time, and a couple people were like, "Yo, Acho's being a hater." That's where, anytime people have something negative to say about the Lions, like that's like the bat signal for Detroit versus everybody tweets to kind of come out, and everybody to kind of, galvanize as a fan base to kind of go, to fight back against whoever is saying something negative. And I'm not necessarily saying that Acho is right, but I think, and Luke, my good friend Luke G, over on his channel kind of addressed this as well. Acho just made a really poor argument. If you're going to make this argument that the Lions are overhyped, if you're going to say that they're overhyped, they're, in my opinion, I would say that you have to have some type of tangible, realistic, like, evaluation of the team to make me feel like, yo, okay, I can kind of see where you're coming from. And I'll be honest, I think Acho was like getting close to making a good point, but just never quite got there. Um, I mean, again, he starts out his argument. If you haven't seen the clip, I definitely, like, implore you to go look it up after the stream. But essentially, he kind of starts out his argument by basically challenging the thought process that he doesn't believe that the team knows what they're doing, right? That he doesn't trust the Lions' approach of how they're building a team, but yet he doesn't necessarily point to any one specific thing to back up that claim that, like, this is why I don't think that they know what they're doing. He more so just throws that claim out there, and I think he kind of just expects his viewers to eat that, that thought process up simply because of the history of the Lions. And I think that is honestly the crux of what Acho built his argument on is, well, the Lions have never been good in the past, so therefore we should question everything about them because they have yet to do it. And while for me that is a flawed approach to, again, evaluating a team. If you want to have, if you want to take a shot at the Lions, if you want to have this moment of basically saying like, hey, I think they're getting too much attention, hey, I think people are putting way too much, eggs in their basket, and building them up too much, there are tangible things that you can look at on this team and say, hey, this is why. One of the things that Acho did at least point out, and like I said, I think he was building an argument, he just never really like fully arrived to the point that he was trying to make, is when he talked about watching the games and how the games unfolded and when they played who, and how those games transpired and so on and so forth. The argument that, like, hey, the Lions didn't beat enough playoff caliber teams is a decent argument, right? I mean, again, you beat who you beat, and the fact that they still got 9 wins shouldn't be something that they should, feel bad about. Again, you beat 9 teams, and whether those 9 teams are playoff teams or not playoff teams is somewhat irrelevant. But at the same time, I can understand the argument if you're saying like, hey, they're not beating good teams, they're just beating other bad teams. But again, it all kind of boils back down to this point, though. If you're going to say that makes them overrated, overrated in what context, right? Again, I'm always a person that when talking sports, if we're going to have an argument, or if we're going to have a debate about something, let's talk about the context of it. Like, what are we actually debating? If you're going to say the Lions are overrated or that they're overhyped, in what context are they overhyped? Because at the same time, fans should be allowed to have expectations. Fans should be allowed to look at their team and say, hey, I think I think my team is going here. I think my team has the potential. It's a, it's a word that Luke kind of hates, but I mean, again, it's all we kind of have until they start playing football. Fans should be allowed to say like, hey, I think my team is making the right steps in these areas to be much improved, to take these leaps. So if you're going to say, Acho, or anybody else that may feel like the Lions are overrated or overhyped, in what context are we talking? Do you think they're being overhyped or overrated in terms of winning the division and in terms of getting a playoff spot, or are you talking about in terms of them being Super Bowl favorites? If we're talking about the latter, if we're talking about being a Super Bowl favorite, I can kind of understand the argument. However, you still have to make the argument, which again, something that Acho just doesn't do well enough. He does by pointing out like, okay, they haven't beaten up playoff teams. Okay, cool. But again, you have to formulate that entire argument. So what I'm going to do in today's stream, again, this is not me changing my mind. This is not me having a different opinion. This is me taking that argument. If you want to sit here and say like, hey, the Lions are overhyped, that they're overrated, that people are buying in too quickly. Okay, let's look at why that may be a legitimate argument. And that's what I'm hoping to do today. But by the end of the stream, I'm also going to debunk that thought process. Why that also like why the things that I'm going to list are issues and things that like fans should be concerned about. But on the flip side of that, why I still think that the Lions will be better. Why I've, in spite of these things, have still said like, hey, they're capable of winning 11 games and still have the potential to probably even win 13. And at worst, at worst, I only see the Lions being like 9-8 again. I think they would be exactly where they were last year at worst. But we're gonna dive into all of that. But before we do, let me jump into the chat, check in with a couple people. West in the chat saying, "Oh, ish Miko, here we go. Let's effing go." Dr. Paparoni saying, I'm of the group of people that just wants them to win the division or a playoff game. Anything after that to me is icing on the cake. Listen, and I think a lot of Lions fans find themselves in that situation. But again, like with any fan base, right, you're going to have varying extremes and you're going to have a portion of the fan base. And I've seen them and I've even entertained the thought as well as like, hey, the Lions could be Super Bowl favorites or the Lions could make it to the Super Bowl. So, again, those people definitely exist. Wes saying lazy hot takes rule ESPN. Listen, ESPN, FS1, you find a sports platform, right? And those hot takes are living there. They live on YouTube, right? You can just search YouTube enough and you're going to see some hot takes on the Lions or any other team. Let's see. Westall saying the refs is what the national narrative can affect. That is true, right? I mean, again, how the national media, at least this is how it's always seemed, and especially in the NFL, how the national media perceives a specific team tends to also kind of somewhat influence how the officials officiate a game, right? Some teams, the teams that tend to be better oftentimes are not as penalized, whereas the teams that are worse tend to be a little more penalized. So that's definitely not wrong in that respect. Dr. Paparoni also saying, yeah, Super Bowl is moving too fast, in my opinion. I think that's, again, I think there's a way that you can get there, but again, if you're like 10 toes down, like it's Super Bowl or bust, I think you've definitely kind of are moving a little too fast at this point. My guy Mark LeBay saying, the more I dig into the Lions defense, the more I believe they are legit. And listen, we're going to talk about it, both sides of that argument, right? Whether the Lions defense, because the Lions defense, especially on this channel, has been a hot topic. It was a topic over on Luke's channel yesterday. If you guys didn't catch Luke's stream, we had a really fun, good debate over there, specifically built around the Lions defense. Friendly neighborhood Lions fan saying, what up? Appreciate you, friendly neighborhood Lions fan, for stopping by. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Pretty sure this is the first time I've ever seen you over on the stream. So, appreciate you checking it out today. And then Andy TTV saying, this Lions team reminds me of the Dolphins last year. And again, I think if this Lions team could have the type of success that the Dolphins did last year, except our quarterback actually stays healthy throughout the course of the season, I think a lot of Lions fans would take that. So, like I said, we're going to get into it as far as, again, what this team actually could be, both on the positive and the negative side. But again, we're going to probably focus a little more on the negative side starting out. My guy Super Saiyan Lion saying, what up, Miko? What's good with you, Super Saiyan? And then Mark also chiming in once again saying a top 10 defense is not out of the question. I'm going to disagree there. I think a lot of things have to go right. I guess what if out of the question, probably not out of the question. I don't think anything should be out of the question necessarily, but I think it's probably very lofty. I don't know how, if we're talking about the Lions offense being another top 5 offense versus the Lions defense somehow going from the bottom to top 10, I would stake my money on the Lions having another top 5 offense before I would, place any kind of bet on the Lions defense going from worse to top 10. Top 15, I think they can do that. Top 10 is lofty. So with that said, actually, like, again, I was saying there's if there's a reason that you're going to sit here and say, like, you know what, the Lions are overhyped, they're getting too much attention, and you want to find a tangible reason to kind of support that argument, let's start with the defense, which again has been a talking point on this channel for a while now. If there's a reason to think that the Lions might be getting a little too much attention, despite what they currently have on the roster, I think the first area that you're going to look at is this defense, and you're going to be seeing a unit that is very much unproven. Now, clearly, they've gone into the offseason, and we've talked about that. We've exhausted this point at this part of the season of the offseason. The Lions spent a lot of their free agency capital rebuilding this secondary, which was one of the worst in the NFL. So, on one hand, yes, they have made improvements, and that has led to a lot of us, myself included, being very positive about this defense, basically saying like, yo, they've already fixed one of their worst units by getting veteran players, by getting Cam Sutton, by getting CJ Gardner-Johnson, by signing Emmanuel Mosley and getting Jerry Jacobs healthy, getting Tracy Walker healthy, in addition to Kirby Joseph returning and drafting Brian Branch. There's a lot of things in that secondary to be excited about. They've even went out and added a linebacker in Jack Campbell. They've even re-signed Alex Anzalone, who led them in tackles. They went out and drafted a defensive tackle in the third round in Broderick Martin. So there's things that a lot of us have looked at and said, okay, these are signs of improvement. However, those things are, again, to kind of use Luke's terms yesterday, we're talking about potential. And so very much so, this Lions defense is unproven. And the things that, even looking at that secondary, who I think is probably their best part of that defense, those guys still have to build chemistry. Those guys still have to fully immerse themselves into Aaron Glenn's defense and understand what they're being asked to do. Cam Sutton spent most of his career over in Pittsburgh, or spent his entire career to this point in Pittsburgh, being asked to do one thing. Now he's coming over to Aaron Glenn's defense, where he may be asked to do something different, or maybe asked to play in different, alignments, or again, probably playing more man or playing less zone or playing more zone, depending on, again, what Aaron Glenn decides to do. The same with Emmanuel Mosley. Emmanuel Mosley actually has, again, two hurdles to kind of jump. One, having to deal with the fact that, again, learning a new defensive system, but on the other end of that, he also is still recovering from injury. And so he is going to have to get up to speed and not only get his body right, but also mentally tap into what Aaron Glenn is asking him to do. So again, and then you have CJ Gardner-Johnson that's going from a Super Bowl caliber defense where they had a great secondary, amazing, defensive line, and great pass rushers, to another defense that, again, that has the potential to be good, to go back to what Mark was saying, that like, hey, maybe they have the potential to be, a top 10 defense, or like Dr. Paparoni is saying, right here, I'm good with them being top 15, top 20, right? If the Lions defense can be that, then great. But CJ is going from, again, a defense that maybe asked him to do one thing, where he was primarily playing safety over, in Philly. And now he may be coming back to Detroit, where maybe he's going to be asked to play more nickel again. Not to say that he's not versed in it, because that's primarily what he played in New Orleans. But it is an adjustment, and it's an adjustment back to, again, one scheme he was playing last year to a new scheme, and now playing around new guys and finding that chemistry. So while there's reasons to point to optimism, but there's also just as many reasons to point to, like, you know what, this defense has some question marks. And if this defense struggles much like it did last year, especially in the beginning of the season, where they were very much so not on the same page, not communicating, and not properly executing game plans, well, that could drastically tank the Lions season. And again, I just talked about the secondary. The defensive line is the area where most people have been focused on, specifically the middle of the defensive line, because like I talked about on Monday, while Aleem is easily your best defensive tackle, he's the best defensive tackle for you. He's not, again, a top tier defensive tackle in the league. And we're once again going into an NFL season with Aleem, where we're all hoping and expecting for him to take that leap, for him to, I don't want to say justify, but showcase the potential that I think a lot of us see. He's very athletic. He showed it in the Giants game, and it's the only game that I can kind of point to for Aleem where I feel like he really put it all together as a defensive tackle, where he showed penetration, where he was also stout against the run. That is the Aleem McNeil that this defense needs in order for them to make that type of jump to be a top 15 to even potentially a top 10 defense. That is what they're going to need. On top of that, you do have guys returning. You do have, you know, Romeo Okwara and Charles Harris who are going to actually be healthy to start the season and can actually contribute week 1. However, these guys are a year older, and then Romeo specifically is coming off an Achilles injury that, again, we've seen this injury impact players differently across the league, but I think for the most part, what has been universally, known and seen when guys suffer Achilles injuries is that it does take something away from them. It does sap away some of their explosion. And for someone like Romeo, who is going to need that to be an effective pass rusher, you can definitely wonder if he's going to possibly like lose a step and not be nearly as productive as he's been in years past. Charles Harris, Charles Harris again has one great year in 2021 and now has had an injury riddled season in 2022. So now we go into 2023 and it's kind of like an unknown, really. Again, going back to the whole reason of why this is an unproven defense, you are still waiting to see if the Charles Harris that you have is the same Charles Harris in 2021. If he can reclaim that level of play, then great. This Lions defense will be much better for it. But if he doesn't, well, then how much more similar will this defense look to what it was in 2022? And let's not just talk about like the veteran guys. Let's talk about, again, some of these guys that are now second year guys. Everybody loves to talk about James Houston, and James Houston definitely put on a show. But again, this is year 2 of James Houston. There's now tape on James Houston. James is going to have to either elevate his play or hope that the offensive tackles that he goes against aren't just more in tune with what he wants to do. If that happens, if James continues to make strides, defense is great. He'll can probably continue to dominate, and he'll more than likely put up the double-digit sack numbers that some people have projected him to have, or potentially even get a starting role. But again, I say all this to say these are the types of things that you can point to on this defense if you wanted to say, hey, this is why the Lions are overhyped, and this is why people are probably getting a little too ahead of themselves when it comes to what the Lions could potentially be in the 2023 NFL season. Really quick, let's jump into the chat. Super Saiyan Lion saying, if Louis Riddick is backing up the Lions, that's all I need. Someone with great football background. And again, Louis Riddick is one of my favorite NFL analysts. So again, for the most part, I agree with you, right? It's not just the fan base that's backing the Lions, right? It's people with very good football acumen, former players, former GMs, former scouts, like that have put in the time to study what the Lions have done, and feel really good about it. So trust me, I definitely see where you're coming from when it comes down to, again, seeing other football minds buying into the Lions at this point in the season. Mark LeBay saying, if the Lions can't stop the run, stop the run up the gut, that will be a problem and could lead to a very disappointing season. And again, that's a part of the defense, right, that a lot of people are concerned about. As good as we think Aleem is, that part of the defense, the run defense was worse than the pass defense. And unlike, again, the pass defense, the run defense hasn't gotten, like, the interior defensive line hasn't gotten a huge influx of talent, hasn't seen a huge upgrade in the talent. You've simply just re-signed Isaiah Buggs, you've signed Christian Covington, and you've signed Broderick Martin. Christian Covington and Broderick Martin are unfortunately just unknowns at this moment until we get to see how they're utilized and how they're employed, in Aaron Glenn's system. And I think that's another unknown, or an unknown part of this defense is what kind of defense is Aaron Glenn going to run in year 3 of being with the Lions, right? The last year we saw 2 different styles of defense being played, and having varying degrees of success. The first half of the season, a lot of man, a lot of, again, not a lot of help from safeties, putting your DBs on islands, and at sometimes maybe the defense just not looking in tune and not communicating well, versus the second half of the season when they're winning games and they're winning, 8 out of 10, communication is better. They're playing less man, they're playing a little more zone, and your defensive line was starting to get after the quarterback consistently. So that's another part of this defense that we just kind of have to wait and see how it kind of plays out. Let's see what else we got here. Grit saying if the defense is lacking in certain areas, but everything else is clicking, Holmes will make a mid-season trade to cover that area. I'm not worried. And again, is that a possibility? Absolutely. And I think it's something that you could definitely be like, okay, depending on what area of the defense is lacking, how do the Lions choose to address it? Right? Do they decide to just shuffle the lineup like they've done that in the past? Right? They've started the season looking at 2022. Right? Amani was supposed to be CB1 slash CB2, whatever, however you want to look at it. But because he just couldn't be relied upon, because he couldn't play the position consistently, the Lions weren't afraid to start shuffling those guys and put other guys in position to see who could play and man that man that spot opposite Jeff. And then the same thing happening to Jeff Okuda later in the season when he wasn't playing well. The Lions not being afraid to throw Will Harris out there or find somebody else to play opposite, play that other cornerback position. We could potentially see the Lions do the same thing if there's trouble with the defensive line, right? Do they start shuffling guys in? Do they start aligning and asking guys to do different things? Or do they do what Grit's talking about and kind of go into the season just looking around the league to see if there's a way that they can upgrade their roster via trade? So that is one reason, right? Like I said, I only have a couple reasons of why. If you're going to sit here and say like, hey, the Lions are overhyped, the Lions are overrated, the defense is the first area that I think most people would probably look to, and that would most people would probably point to saying like, hey, this is why they're not as good, because this was a bottom tier defense last year. Yes, they've improved the secondary, but they haven't drastically improved their run defense, and there hasn't been like this huge influx of talent. And this group, even with the new pieces, still have to gel, still have to get on the same page. And until that happens, there's going to be, and there probably should be, a level of skepticism in everybody's mind about the Lions defense. The next area that probably won't get talked about nearly as much, and most people feel very optimistic about going into the 2023 season, is the offense. But at the same time, as good as the offense was last year, it shouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that there could be some potential of offensive regression by either the players or the coaching staff. Listen, having a top 5, top 3 offense in the NFL is tough to have. And you guys are very well aware of how I feel about the type of play that is going to be required of Jared Goff. And I'm not making this all about Jared Goff at all, because I think if the offense regresses, it could be for a number of reasons. It's not just all on the shoulders of Jared Goff. If Jared Goff could play worse, we also have to take account of the fact that, and I believe another GM pointed this out in an article that The Athletic wrote, that the Lions have made the biggest change on the offense in the running back position. And most of us have just taken it at face value that the Lions got better because we like the style of running backs that they got with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs obviously being a closer comparison to what they had in DeAndre Swift, just younger and with less injury baggage. But David Montgomery, and a lot of us have kind of just assumed that, like, well, David Montgomery is going to be drastically better than Jamal Williams, without acknowledging the fact that while Jamal may not have been, box office, may have been the flashiest running back, he was the definition of do your job. He was asked to get tough yardage, and in most situations he did. What he lacked at, and the reason why David Montgomery is seen as an upgrade over him, is break tackles, is being able to pick up those additional yards and to do what Ben Johnson talked about, as we started to move into the offseason, about taking, runs that should be 4 to 5 yards, which are, again, good running plays, but actually extending those out to be 8-9 yard type of runs to make, second and third down way more attainable for this offense. So you've made a huge personnel change in your backfield, and that shouldn't be something that's just overlooked or glossed over as like, oh no, this will absolutely be better. There is always the potential and the possibility that, again, Jahmyr Gibbs being a rookie coming into the NFL is going to have to adapt to the speed of the game and have to understand and build chemistry with his offensive line and build trust, right? One of the things that we kind of, again, got on DeAndre Swift about was like, hey, trust your offensive line and trust the holes that they're opening up for you. We are hoping and we're expecting that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to do that without, again, ever really seeing it. Now, again, it's part of being a fan, though, right? Like, none of us should take this negative approach like, oh, he won't do it. Obviously, we're all going to lean into the thought process that, you know what, Jameer is going to come in and he's going to do what his coaches tell him to do. And he's going to, take the runs and take the lanes that are opened up for him. And a lot of that also goes and speaks to his skill set, which I've harped upon a lot on this channel about Jameer having amazing vision. And that's why I think he'll be drastically better than DeAndre Swift, is just the fact that he has better vision and will trust what his eyes show him when it comes down to, again, whether it's an outside run, inside run, or even being out, out as a receiver and picking up yak in certain situations, being able to read his blockers and to be able to get more yardage when the ball is put in his hands. When looking at David Montgomery, again, David Montgomery, I don't necessarily have a problem with the style that David Montgomery runs with. I think the question that, again, I think a lot of us have overlooked, and I think would be a fair criticism or a fair way of trying to rein in expectations on the Lions offense, is just whether or not David Montgomery can stay healthy for the entirety of the season. We know he'll play through injury, but how hampered will his play be if he is injured? I mean, again, think about the fact that we ended spring practice and David Montgomery was injured. We're talking about him probably being the running back that's going to get the bulk of the carries, that's going to take on the Jamal Williams role and have to get those hard yardage, which means he's going to be getting hit, which means he's going to take way more punishment than probably a Jahmyr Gibbs would in those situations. While, again, Jamal wasn't flashy, in 2022, he did that job effectively and was able to take those hits, be able to get that hard yardage and just keep rolling in a lot of different games. David Montgomery is going to have to prove that he can do that for the Lions going into the season. So again, if there's a criticism, if there's something that you want to point to on the offense and be like, hey, the offense may not be as good, you can easily look at the running back position and just simply say like, hey, they've switched out the talent. So who knows how good that talent's going to be. The next area, I do think you can actually look at coaching, and not to say that Ben Johnson is all of a sudden going to forget how to scheme and put together a game plan. But the benefit that Ben Johnson had last year was that he wasn't the OC in 2021. So he got to roll out in 2022 and kind of be a surprise to the entire NFL. And teams now have tape on how the Lions like to operate, what their tendencies are on first and second down, how they choose, what type of plays do they run and when they're on this part of the field or with this package or with these collection of players on the field. There's a little more to analyze and diagnose for defensive coordinators. So if there's a reason that, again, there could potentially be some regression, it's not because Ben Johnson isn't a good offensive coordinator. It could just simply be the fact that like, hey, there's now tape out on what Ben Johnson likes to do, and teams may be better prepared for it. Teams may be better prepared on how to attack Jared Goff and how to limit or attack the run game and how Ben Johnson likes to do certain things. Again, we talked about it, or I saw this pop up earlier this week about how Jared Goff was, again, one of the most blitz quarterbacks in the NFL, but yet, obviously didn't get sacked a ton and didn't have a lot of turnovers. That can easily flip the other way though, right? And that can all be dependent on how defenses choose to play you. Jared Goff had one of the faster releases in the NFL last year. I think his average time of release was about 2.4 seconds in the pocket. That's how fast he was. That's how long it typically took him to get a pass out. The fastest was Joe Burrow at 2.2. One of the biggest differences between Joe Burrow and Jared Goff that I like when looking at that stat that really kind of caught my eye was batted passes. Joe Burrow was only 0.2 seconds faster, but had a much larger sample size of his passes batted down. I've always been of the opinion that, like, again, while getting the ball out quick is obviously advantageous to your offense, it can easily be nullified by simply defensive linemen reading the situation and realizing like, okay, I just need to get my hands up. And if I start batting down passes, this short passing game or the short to mid-range passing game probably won't hurt us as much. And we've seen Jared Goff have that issue in the past, not as much in 2022. It was a bit of an issue in 2021, but it is something that, again, if through repetition, through study of a defensive coordinator and game planning, maybe it's a way that teams decide to attack this Lions offense differently in 2023. And now it's potentially that could be something that sees the offense regress a little bit. Doesn't mean that anybody's hurt. Doesn't mean that anybody is having a terrible season. It just becomes a thing of, hey, we now know what this team likes to do, and now we have a better understanding of how we can potentially attack it. I saw this by from Mark LeBay, and so I want to address it really quick. What happens if the offense to the offense if Ragnow can't play? And that's another huge issue. It's one of the few times. This is one of the few injuries I'm going to talk about because we know it's going to be an issue for Frank all season. Injury is the greatest equalizer in sports, right? It can happen to anyone. It can happen at any time, and it can just as easily diminish and ruin a team's season. And so again, we could always speculate about another of an array of players having injury concerns, but for the Lions specifically, we know that Frank Ragnow is a huge piece to this offense running smoothly, right? He's one of the smarter guys on the offense. He helps get the offensive linemen on the same page. He has great, chemistry with Jared and understands how to communicate with him so that they're on the same page and that they're seeing the same things. But if Frank's injury leads to him being out for an extended amount of time, yeah, that's another reason why it's a small part of what could lead to this offense regressing. Just because now Jared has to work with a different center, whether that's Graham or someone else, and he's going to have to build that chemistry and hope that he and this new center are seeing things the correct way. Um, and again, hoping that that lineman has the same type of impact in the run game and the passing game as a Frank Ragnow, who is a Pro Bowl level player in the NFL. So again, it's not something that I think many of us would give a lot of credence to. It's not something that I think a lot of us are worried about. But again, for the context of this show, for the context of this topic, if you wanted to put together an argument about why this team might be getting a little overhyped, you can look at the offense and you can find things to poke a hole in. I didn't even talk about the receivers and the fact that again you're going to be missing Jamo for 6 weeks. And even though yes, this Lions team found success last year without Jamo, that doesn't always translate. Doesn't mean that you're going to find that same success this year. You don't have a DJ Chark to rely on. You don't know how well Jared Goff and Marvin Jones are going to gel together. And again, going back to just understanding like defense is probably queuing in on tendencies a little bit more. You just don't know how defenses are going to potentially attack and try to take away Amon-Ra St. Brown and make Jared Goff's job a little more difficult. So before I move on to my third point, let me jump back into the chat, see what you guys are thinking about again, my whole take that the offense could potentially regress. Mark LeBay saying that at the start of 2022, PFF had the offense ranked 25th. The Lions offense finished the season as 5th highest scoring offense. So again, like I think honestly, Mark, like I think I know what you're trying to communicate with that, right? Is saying like, hey, we thought they'd be bad and they end up being better. I think the opposite is just as plausible, right? Like the offense could be going into this season and we all assume it's going to be great and then it not be as good. That is truly the unknown of again understanding how you match up against teams. We again health, who's going to be available, how defenses choose to attack you, this year versus last year. So yeah, Casey in the chat, what's good with you, Casey? Saying Lions D has more talent at each position group, so should be better. Maybe middle of the pack at best. Offense made marginal changes, but should be like last year, another 9-win season, plus or minus maybe 3 wins. And Casey, that's one of the reasons why like I don't have a huge drop off for this team. So when people talk about like, well, the Lions are overhyped, like I said, if you missed it at the beginning of the show, if we're talking about the Lions being overhyped, in what context? Because if we're talking about them being overhyped to win the division or be a playoff team, I don't think they're overhyped. I think they're properly being hyped. I think they're properly rated in that context. Now, if we're talking about, being true Super Bowl contenders or Super Bowl favorites or something like that, then yeah, I can see why. And these are some of the reasons why you can kind of point to and say, you know what, maybe they haven't made enough adjustments and enough upgrades to contend with the likes of a Philadelphia Eagles or San Francisco 49ers. Maybe they're just not quite there. And so in that context, for those people that are putting them in that conversation, yeah, maybe they're a little hyped. Maybe they're a little overrated in that context. But again, there's arguments to be made if you want to make that argument. And the reason I'm making the argument, for those of you who didn't catch it at the beginning of the show, is because I don't think Emmanuel Acho was necessarily wrong in categorizing that the Lions might be overhyped. I just think he made a horrible argument for it. I don't think he gave enough of a good analysis of the team to say, hey, this is why I think they're overhyped. I think he more so leaned on the Lions' history. I think he more so just leaned on the fact that, like, well, they've never been good at beating playoff teams, so they won't be good at beating playoff teams in the future. When it's like, but they don't have to specifically beat playoff teams to win the division. They don't have to just beat playoff teams to get into the playoffs. They just need to get enough wins, and the Lions have a capable of enough roster to potentially do that. Hatter's House 710 saying our run game should be just fine. Again, that's a thought process that a lot of us have. I have that, right? I think it'll be fine. I think they've upgraded across the board in terms of talent. And again, you're still having that same offensive line. So in theory, the run game should be fine. Dr. Paparoni saying Gibbs has a way of setting up his blockers, or setting his blockers up as well. Again, another point that I've continued to harp about Jahmyr Gibbs. Alabama's offensive line was terrible, and he still found ways of being productive, right? I know the GM that wrote the article about, again, it may be a step back because Jahmyr Gibbs never had a 1,000-yard season. Go back and look at Jahmyr Gibbs' stats and compare them to DeAndre Swift. Jahmyr Gibbs was shy of 1,000 yards. I think he had about like 970 yards, so about 30 to 40 yards short of that 1,000-yard mark. But he also got like 30 to 40 less carries than DeAndre Swift did when he was at Georgia. So again, to simply say like, oh, well, he never got 1,000 yards, so therefore he can't, or to make it seem as though he's a lesser running back, you also have to look at opportunities. Jahmyr Gibbs just didn't get the same type of workload that DeAndre Swift got at Georgia. You give Jahmyr Gibbs an additional 30, 40 carries, or if that Alabama offensive line was as good as the Georgia offensive line that DeAndre Swift was running behind, maybe he's putting up closer to 1,200 yards because that's just how explosive Jahmyr Gibbs was at that time. Brian Kimmel in the chat saying 2 new running backs, a new tight end, Jones learning chemistry with Goff, and Jameson still learning the system may cause a slow start to our offense. Again, this is another example of something that's tangible that if you, again, wanted to be like, maybe we need to pump the brakes a little on the Lions and the Lions offense, Brian does a really good job. These are all very tangible things that could lead to the Lions having a slower start. But again, the thing that I think quells a lot of our fears in that situation is the fact that you do have Ben Johnson, and Ben Johnson put on a masterclass on how to utilize the talent that you're given. And so if he can continue to do that, then there's no reason to think the Lions offense won't be just as good. Joshua saying, my confidence is high AF, stoked, not scared. Listen, and I don't think any Lions fan should be, right? This stream is not to say like, hey, this is why you need to be scared. No, this is just to be like, hey, if you want to, like, again, poke holes in the Lions, hopes and trying to properly gauge where they're rated or how hyped they should or shouldn't be, then yeah, these are some things that you can probably point to if you want to say they're overhyped. I still think that they're properly rated. I think, the attention and where, people think the Lions are going to get to is actually, right on the mark personally. Let's see. Mark also saying this offensive line doesn't have the quality backups it had last year. Again, another good point to make, right? Evan Brown was somebody that you at least felt comfortable where if Frank wasn't there, you felt really confident about Evan being able to play guard or center. Obviously you're getting Vitae back and you're getting Graham. And so one of them is bound to be a backup. So there's some, depth at the guard spot, but still, what about your tackle spots, right? The Lions, Matt Nelson is a great swing tackle, but I don't think he's somebody that you want to play, have to play long-term if the likes of Panay or Taylor Decker go down for an extended amount of time. I don't think Dan Skipper is currently on the roster this year. And so while Dan wasn't a great tackle, he was a good fill-in tackle, or he was a great fill-in guard. So again, there's a lapse in depth in the event that, again, that injuries start to pile up. Joshua once again pointing out our 2 running backs are more flexible, our offense about to be more unpredictable. And again, these are the counterpoints, right? Like, and Joshua, I agree with you 1,000%. And this is some of the stuff that I've also been echoing. So when people have this claim that like, hey, the Lions are overhyped, you kind of have to like debunk the improvements though. Like, are you telling me that they're not going to be more unpredictable because of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery? Like, you can't say that they're not going to be. Uh, Casey saying 5,000 people lined up for Kool-Aid and cornbread at Allen Park today for training camp seats. LOL. Bro, so I was trying to go. Like, I was legit trying to, like, I thought it'd be a fun thing to do with the family because I've never been to training camp. And I forgot to, like, set an alarm and do it early. So I was like, all right, well, how bad could it possibly be? That queue said like 4,400 and something. I was like, bro, I'm not getting anything. Like, there's no way, me and the fam are going to training camp this year. So yeah, I'm kind of bummed out about it that I won't be able to go. But again, I'll just read up on everything. So it's all good in that respect. Um, Matthew saying, I heard Montgomery was injured quite often last year, but played in most games, but was limited. That's a scary thought. Reminds me of someone else. And again, it's a right. It's a thing that we didn't necessarily have to worry about with Jamal last year, right? There weren't too many games last year where Jamal was banged up and then it drastically impacted his play. Again, not saying that it will because the injuries are unpredictable. So it would be foolish for anybody to go into the season with this worry that like, oh, David Montgomery is going to be injured and severely, limited. But it is something where it's a thought. It's something that is part of his history as a running back that like, yeah, he sometimes when he gets banged up, it definitely like impacts his play, but he's the type of player that will go out there. It's something that a lot of us obviously wanted out of DeAndre Swift. It was something that the coaching staff wanted out of DeAndre Swift. You don't necessarily have to worry about that though with David Montgomery, is that David Montgomery is going to say like, no, I'll go out there and do something. I may not be able to do everything well, but I can do something to help the team in some capacity. Let's see. James Wilson, I think Antoine Green will get a shot. Listen, with Jamon not being available for those first few weeks, Antoine Green has a really good shot, right? And it's for any of these receivers not named Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh Reynolds, and Khalif Raymond, it's all about chemistry. Like the sooner any of these other wide receivers can build up a rapport and get on the same page as Jared Goff, the better the more likely they are to make the roster, the more likely they are to actually have a role on this offense. Casey saying Hendon Hooker should be healthy by the time Jameson's ready to play. Hey, I've already said like I'm trying to stay in this mindset that like I want the Lions to win as many games as they possibly can. I want them to lock up a playoff spot early so that Hendon can play week 18, right? Like that's, and it's not like he needs to. I just as a fan type of thing, like I would just like to see it. I would just like to see him in an NFL game and just see get at least a sample size of what he could potentially be long term for the Lions going forward. Terry saying the one I'm worried about is Laporta, in the sense that in the first game against KC is him getting starstruck and not performing. I think I would start Mitchell or the other tight end to start the game. Terry, I would agree with you, right? I mean, again, with any of these rookie, whether it's Sam, whether it's Jameer, whether it's Jack, any of these rookies that are going to be called on, Broderick, who's like, those guys are going to have bigger roles. Brian Branch is going to have a role on the defensive side of the football. Like any of these rookies, there's a lot of emphasis put on these rookies to contribute in some capacity. Maybe not as much as in the past, but Gibbs and Laporta and Jack Campbell absolutely are going to be asked to contribute in big ways on their respective sides of the ball. So with any of them, there should always be that concern of like, what if they don't, quickly acclimate to the speed of the game? What if they get starstruck, like you're saying? In the likes of Sam Laporta, what if he pulls a TJ Hawkinson where he has one amazing game against Kansas City, but then like never quite replicates that success the rest of the year? There's so many different variables that can go into it. And again, I don't know if I would use those as legitimate like concerns to base it around like, hey, this is why like the rookies won't contribute, but it's something to consider. It's definitely a possibility. But again, the thing that would make me feel better about it, and the thing that I think should or probably does make you feel more better about it, is the fact that that Ben Johnson does a really good job of scheming his players, that he does a really good job of putting them in position to succeed. And when you still have the likes of Amon-Ra St. Brown, and when you have the likes of Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond, those guys are going to make it easier for these rookies to acclimate. Even David Montgomery being a veteran, like they're going to take some level of pressure off of these rookies so that when called upon, they can do their job without as much pressure on their shoulders. Even again, Alex Anzalone for Jack Campbell, having that mentor, having that guy next to you that's done it, and can definitely, teach you the ropes along the way. James saying for the Lions at Allen Park for training camp tickets, the hype is pretty high. And again, it's probably another, like, I didn't intend to do this topic on the same day that like the training camp tickets went out, but I think that's a really good indication of just how high the hype is around the team right now. And again, I'm not necessarily saying it's too high, but yeah, selling out training camp tickets on day one is ridiculous. I personally can't remember the last time that happened for the Lions. For anybody that's been to training camp, you guys can probably tell me how frequently that happens. But I mean, again, day one, those tickets drop and they're already sold out. I mean, I don't even think that happened last year, and Hard Knocks was recording, and I don't think that necessarily happened as quickly. So yeah, the hype is really high. My guy Rumble in the chat saying big facts. The second half of the season, no one wanted that smoke. I think you're replying to Joshua, who said last season the Lions looked like a playoff team and nobody wanted the Lions to make it, and that's facts. The thing that I think, again, if we're talking about overhyped, right? Something that I sometimes pull the reins on, like, this is true. This is 1000% true, right, Joshua? What you're talking about, I tend to pull the reins back on this simply because we all know momentum doesn't easily transfer from season to season, right? Like, the Lions didn't get to just bottle up all of that momentum that they put together in those last 10 games and get to just crack that open week one against the Chiefs. They don't get to just re-tap back into that. This isn't Space Jam, and they get to have all that talent, locked into a football, or all that momentum locked into a football, and they can just pick it back up that easily. Doesn't mean that they can't, because they now understand, I think, and Dan Campbell and his coaching staff has done a good job of implementing the thought process and the mentality of, this is what it takes to win. This is how you have to practice. This is how you have to prepare. This is the type of ownership you have to take. This is the type of communication you need to have with your teammates. So again, there are plenty of reasons to think like, hey, this is why they could be better. And I don't think that's overhype. I think that's setting proper expectations. Let me go down here a little bit. Sorry if I'm skipping over some of you guys. Again, not doing it intentionally. There's just one more point I want to get to, but I do want to, again, acknowledge the comments and things like that. BD Buster saying, what's good, man? Glad I caught you live. BD, always appreciate you stopping by. Always appreciate you showing love in the comment section of any of the other videos too. So, yo, I'm glad you got to make it as well. Super Saiyan Lion saying, bro, can we stop with the hooker crap? No. Everybody loves a good hooker, and so, the Lions have one themselves. So no, we're going to talk about Hendon Hooker as much as we want to. But I mean, we'll see, right? I know some people don't want to, again, put that type of expectation on Hendon Hooker that he's a potential future starter for this team. I feel comfortable in where I stand with him when just looking at what he has physically in his physical traits. And we'll see, right? Maybe he's a long-term backup. Maybe he's the future starter if, the Lions determine that they don't want to pay Jared Goff a ton of money. It's all really the guys over at Pride Detroit, Eric Schlitt, has kind of said this, and I think it's fairly accurate that, like, listen, the Lions clearly would love to extend Jared Goff. They would love him to do nothing else but prove that he should be their long-term, starter at quarterback. And the best way for him to do that, win games, win the division, at least get them into the playoffs. Jared Goff does any of those things or all three of those things, the dude can literally walk into Brad Holmes' office with a blank check and just say, this is how much I want. It'll be that simple for him, in my opinion. But yeah, we just kind of got to wait and see. But listen, Hendon Hooker is a rookie quarterback, and rookie quarterbacks always, and he's also like potentially QB2, right? So QB2 is always a fan favorite, especially here in Detroit. My guy Tony Chase saying, what up, Miko? I have no worries. I want to see what these boys got. And the things I do have questions about are, is Glenn the guy with revamped DBs, and if Goff is the guy? I'd rather know now than later. And listen, I think those are, again, I've been trying my best not to put the onus on one individual player or one individual coach too much, but I think those are two very legitimate questions, right? Aaron Glenn, this is something that we got into over on Luke's stream yesterday about Aaron Glenn and whether or not Aaron Glenn is the guy, because it's year 3, and sure, the excuse of like, "Hey, the defense wasn't good in 2021," legitimate. The excuse that maybe the talent wasn't improved drastically enough in 2022 is also legitimate. But also, Aaron Glenn has to take accountability for putting together a scheme that his players were not executing properly and not doing like where we're constantly being exposed in those first 7 games, right? And then he makes an adjustment in the second half of the season and the defense looks better. So a lot of onus absolutely is going to be on Aaron Glenn because he has to be able to prove that he can put together a scheme after getting the investment that he's gotten with an improved and revamped secondary. And yeah, a couple players here and there that should be able to upgrade certain position groups. Again, adding Jack Campbell, adding Broderick Martin and Christian Covington to the defensive tackle room, and getting your edge rushers healthy across the board are all things that like I've been saying, I'm gonna continue to say it. Aaron Glenn has the best hand he's been given to put together at least an average defense in the NFL. We should not be talking about this defense being bottom 3, bottom 5. Like we should be talking about them somewhere in the range of 15 to 20, right? 20 at worst. 15, if they're at 15, I'm gonna be ecstatic. And so that's kind of just how I look at it. And then with Goff, consistency. Consistency is the key for Jared Goff in any season, honestly. Like if he can continue to play like he did last year, limiting turnovers, being efficient with the football, and again helping the offense move down the field and get touchdowns and not field goals. That's all Jared Goff has to do, right? We talked about it, or I brought it up in the last stream. I'm not going to over. I'm not going to put too much on Jared Goff this year, right? The name of the game is win, and as long as he's winning, that's all that matters. That's why I said a little while ago, if he helps them win the division, if he helps them get into the playoffs, and definitely if he helps them get a playoff win, blank check. He's able to ask for whatever he wants, and he'll be the quarterback for the Detroit Lions for years to come. And none of us should have a problem with that, especially if he is able to sustain that level of play year in and year out. So let me see. One funky Lion fan saying, I never liked Goff, not even during the draft. Hooker was the QB I liked the most this draft. So yeah, I want to see Hooker take Goff's job. And one funky Lion fan, you're not the only one, right? Like there's plenty of fans that would like to see that because, you know, again, whether it's preference, whether it's just being able to see and believe that Hendon has a deeper well of talent than Jared Goff does. There's a number of people that are going to want to see that, but it's not going to come easy. Jared, Dan Campbell, and Brad Holmes are not going to just give that job to Hendon Hooker. Jared Goff is going to have to fumble the bag, and the Lions are going to have to see something in Hendon Hooker that makes them believe, you know what, he's the long-term answer. Mark, I don't know why you would even put this in the waters. In past years, each winning season was followed by a losing season. That was before Dan Campbell got here. All right, that's all I'm gonna say. All right, Dan has done nothing but go from a losing season to a winning season. And I believe he'll have these guys ready. And I think that's one of the things that doesn't get talked about probably nearly enough about Dan Campbell is his ability. I don't think Dan's voice is going to get lost in this locker room. I don't think it will. I don't think it has. And so I think he has that type of command. I think when Brad Holmes and people start talking about Dan Campbell, they're like, he has that it. I think it's that. I think good coaches are able to keep their teams locked in. And even if they're not locked in, he's able to do things to help refocus them. And so I that's one of the reasons why, one of the the less talked about reasons is why I think this team is actually going to do much better. But going back to, again, what the core of this stream has been about, I have one more reason why, again, if you're thinking the Lions are overhyped, this is a reason why you could definitely believe that. And it's the simple fact that the Lions are being put into a situation where there's going to be increase in pressure and expectations. And pressure can make pipes burst, right? Like it's a reality in life that not everyone handles pressure. Not every person or team or organization or company can handle having additional expectations and pressure heaped upon them. And right now, the Lions, at least from for the time that I've been a fan, right, this is probably the first time in a long time where the Lions are going in with such lofty expectations, where the division is ripe for the picking, where your offense is coming off one of their best seasons, and you've added, again, you've revamped your secondary. You've done all the necessary things where it technically should point you towards like, hey, division winners, playoff contenders, lofty but possible Super Bowl contenders, right? You're being talked about on the national media, whether it's Lewis Riddick, whether it's Colin Cowherd, whether I mean, again, even though Emmanuel Acho kind of wanted to say that the Lions were overhyped, there's also a clip of him saying that the Lions are going to be the kings of the NFC North. So again, how do you kind of want to weigh that in that situation? That's why I think like when Asha was probably saying that they're overhyped, I think he's probably talking about in terms of Super Bowl contenders, because you've already kind of said that they'll probably be the NFC North winners. And so it's kind of tough then when all these expectations are heaped upon the Lions. Will they live up to it? Will they be able to stay above water? And like I just said, there's enough reasons to think that they can. Um, Simply looking at the fact of who is leading them, when looking at Dan Campbell and looking at somebody that I don't think gets caught up in the moment, somebody who doesn't coach scared, somebody who attacks the day as a head coach and isn't afraid to make mistakes, but is going to make mistakes on the path towards winning, and not necessarily in trying to play it safe all the time. So um again, if there's a reason to be pessimistic and be like, you know what, maybe the Lions are a little overhyped. Sure, they're going into unknown territory where, again, this is a team that for a lot of years was probably looked at as an easy W on a lot of teams' schedule. That's not the case anymore. You're coming off a 9-8 season. You're coming off of being one of the better offenses. You're coming off of down that stretch of 10 games, having a pretty respectable defense and ranking really high in a lot of defensive metrics down that stretch. You're not going to catch guys, overlooking you. You're not going to catch guys lapsing when you match up against them. When you play Kansas City week 1, you're going to get the very best of the Super Bowl champs. The same with Seattle, the same with the Ravens, the Chargers, like whoever it may be, like you're going to get their best shot week in, week out. The Packers are going to give you their best shot week in, week out, because not only is there talk about you being, the new Kings of the North, you've ruined their season last year. So there's absolutely going to be added motivation for that. How the Lions handle that, how they handle that pressure, how they handle having these expectations. And I'm not even saying like necessarily from the outside. I'm sure a lot of these guys have this internal pressure. They see it just as clearly as we do as fans. They know what is in front of them. And I think they know just as well that these windows in the NFL can close quickly. And if you don't, execute, and if you don't capitalize on that opportunity, you could be a playoff contender one year, and then you could be picking at the top of the draft the next. It can literally happen that quickly if you don't capitalize, and teams can rebound just as quickly in the NFL. So again, those are some of the reasons why, like, again, if we're talking about them being overhyped, these are the things that like Emmanuel Acho could have pointed out. These are things that a number of people can point out and point to, and they're legitimate. And it may not sound great and it may not make you feel good, but they're legitimate gripes. They're legitimate areas on this team or within this team that are going to have to be smoothed out in order for the Lions to accomplish a lot of the things that we all believe they can. And again, like I said, the reason though that I don't think this is hype, like I don't at all think the Lions are overhyped in the slightest. I think they are properly rated. Anyone that is saying that this team can win 10 plus games, 10 to 12 games, possibly even 13, is right on the money, right? We just talked about it. Your division isn't nearly as good as it was a year ago. We'll still see, like, I still think you'll get a fight from the Packers, even though Aaron Rodgers isn't there. And that's just because they have really good running backs. They have a really good offensive line. That defense is a little more proven probably than yours is, but that could potentially be, a roadblock. But I still think the Lions come out on top in that. The Vikings are out here committing football franchise suicide, and the Bears have to prove it. Like, I think Justin Fields has the potential to have a really good season this year. I think they've done some things to help him probably have a better season than he did last year, but he still has to take the leap. He still has to actually show that progression. So there's no reason why this team with added players on offense and upgrades at the running back position, I believe from a talent perspective, from having a revamped secondary, from having a healthy, edge group and athletic linebackers that like, hey, this team should be better. They should be better. They should easily be able to, if not sweep their division, go 5-1, 4-2 at the worst, right? I think if they lose more than 2 games in this division, like something's gone horribly wrong, in my opinion. And then after that, you're talking about the rest of their schedule, and their rest of their schedule isn't all that imposing, right? Yes, you have the Chiefs. Yes, you have the Ravens. Yes, you have the Chargers. Um, the Saints is like kind of a toss up just because I really like the Saints defense, and it really just kind of depends. Like sometimes the Saints defense shows up, sometimes it doesn't. And that's a defensive group that could potentially cause some trouble for the Lions offense. Dallas is a team that's always tough. I did a whole video on this on the channel of like just a couple teams that I think could be problematic. But even still, you take those handful of teams, but then there's the rest of their schedule, and I think there's a lot of winnable games. I think they get their revenge against the Seattle. I think they get their revenge against Carolina. Tampa's going to be terrible. We don't even know like who the hell is going to be quarterback for Tampa. I think Tampa's going to be terrible. Um, I think Jameer Gibbs is going to show why he's the better running back when they square off against Atlanta and Bijan Robinson. Like there's enough on the table. There's enough to tangibly look at and say, you know what, this team is going to be better. How much better? I don't know. I don't think the offense has to be drastically better. I just think it can't be drastically worse. Like you can't go from top 5 to top 15. Like you can't have that type of drop off. You can probably afford to have a drop off where you're top 5 to maybe top 7, top 10. That's probably fine, and you can still be in the hunt for a playoff spot and be in the hunt to secure the division. Sure. Your defense though, I don't think is going to be as bad. I think it can make that jump from 31, 32 to in the 20s and hopefully ideally the teens, the late teens or high teens as far as 15. It's it's all it's all possible. I think everything for the Lions is in front of them, and the hype and the talk that people have for them isn't just hype for the sake of hype. It's expectations. This is a team that has gotten better. Even in that 2021 season, even though they only had 3 wins, they started to get a little better near the end of it. And then the same with 2022. Sure, rough start, started to get better though as the season progressed. This team is one of the youngest in the NFL, and they're learning how to win. And I think they have more experience going into 2023. And that's why this team isn't overhyped. That's why it's fair to expect them to win the division. That's why it's fair to expect them to win a playoff game and host a playoff game and again, at least threaten or at least show themselves capable of making that type of push. Now that's all that's left is that they have to do it. And that's where, again, we're gearing up for that, right? Training camp is going to kick off next week. As far as actual practices, rookies reported today. Vets will report on Saturday, I believe. And we're going to gear up and we're going to see how ready and once once the 5,000 of you that were able to get tickets to training camp are able to attend, we'll see how ready they are. We'll read about, from guys like, Dave Burkett and Pride of Detroit and, the Detroit News. Like we'll get an insight into how much better this team is looking. And that'll help us understand, like, what are these expectations lofty or are we right on the money with them? Um, all right, let's jump back in the chat so I can address some of your guys' questions. And let's see. Grit saying for Hendon Hooker to be our quarterback, we suck with golf this year. At this point, we should all be rooting for golf. And I don't think anybody necessarily is rooting against him, right? I don't, and I know I definitely am not, right? Because to root against Jared Goff is to root against the Lions having a successful season. And that's just not like a positive thing to be doing at this point. But again, I understand why some people would be excited and like the potential of Hendon Hooker. Like I said, I like the potential of Hendon Hooker. Luke, I saw you in the chat. I know Luke loves Hendon Hooker, and he has even loftier, projections of who Hendon could be in the NFL. So yeah, Josh was saying, and MCDC staff took a minute, but now it's straight. And that's the thing too, right? Like you had to go through the bumps and bruises of an Anthony Lynn, offense, and whether it was him and Jared just not being on the same page, or Anthony Lynn not understanding this type of offense that Dan Campbell wanted to run, whatever the narrative was, you got to Ben Johnson, and now you have something in place that you want. Same with Aubrey Pleasant. As much as they liked Aubrey Pleasant, there clearly was some sort of disconnect between what the coaching staff, what Dan and Aaron Glenn wanted, and whatever the hell his DBs were doing, especially against Miami. BD saying, bro, I'm so pumped for the season. Can't wait, bro. You and me both. Because I just want, like, I want us to stop talking, to Luke's point, right, that he made yesterday about the word potential just being irritating. I want to stop talking about potential. I want to start talking about what we can actually see on the field. I want to start talking about what's happening and not what happened or what could happen. I want to talk about like what we're actually seeing on Sunday. So I'm right there with you, man. I can't wait for the season to really kick off. Josh was saying, so I wouldn't have given Jerry Jacobs a chance and wouldn't have used James Houston. And I think that's, I mean, I don't know if you're saying that as like, just like as an insight into like, again, like how differently fans look at things. I mean, Jerry Jacobs was somebody that I wasn't super high on either. Like, I think Jerry can be a little grabby at times. And it's the thing that I would hate to see crumble this defense is if like other areas are playing good and then we're giving up yardage because Jerry's just being a little too physical on the outside. But the Lions need that. They need that physical approach, to on their defense. And again, yeah, James Houston wasn't somebody that they carried early in the season and slowly found that, he had the ability to be a great pass rusher, their best pass rusher. So it's something that most of us wouldn't have necessarily probably done, looking at where we started, this time last year. But you see how they impacted the team down the stretch. And it's like, you know what? Maybe this coaching staff can get these guys ready. Maybe they can get them in position to play well. Tony saying good comms, but that grit at the end of the season shows me this team is ready for all that smoke. We're going to come to play. I don't doubt that. And I don't either, right? I've already kind of said like the biggest and most important thing for this team early in the season is that they have to start fast. And I think they have to show that same mentality that like, hey, just because you did it before, just because you were able to rally down the stretch of the season last year, doesn't mean that's how you should start this season. You have to start with that same hunger. You have to be able to come ready to play and punch guys in the mouth, right? Do what Dan Campbell talked about in his press conference, take a kneecap early and stop and not expect to be able to wear down teams later in the season. Grit saying if they live up to expectations, Goff's not going. It's not going to be going anywhere though. I'm not convinced Ben Johnson will either. I think Ben Johnson. Listen, if this offense is good for another year, yeah, Ben Johnson's out of here. Like, and it's probably the most sure thing I feel as of right now. Now it depends on like what teams are available, because I think the benefit of Ben Johnson being a smart man and probably having, Dan Campbell, Aaron Glenn, and having other people around the organization in his ear is that I don't think he has to be desperate to take a job. He doesn't have to take a bad job. I think he really can find a situation and, when it comes down to that time, if the Lions again have had another successful season, Ben Johnson is going to be able to find the team with the best, quarterback situation or just roster situation that he can go into and find success. Luke saying is it really revenge? The Lions should not have lost to the Seahawks of Geno, but they did. So, yeah, it's revenge. You did lose. You shouldn't have lost, but you did. So now you get a chance to right that wrong. And yeah, we'll see how it shakes up. I mean, again, they'll be here, in Detroit again. So it literally is going to feel like running it back. And hopefully the defense actually shows up ready to play that day. BD saying, yeah, but there's usually one or two games they shouldn't lose, and they do. And that's why I have them at 11-6 instead of 13-4 or 12-5. It's just there's going to be that team that like, man, they really shouldn't lose that game, but they will just because who knows, right? It could be injury. It could be just a game where there's more penalties called in the Lions that game than there is in others. You you really kind of just can't you really can't kind of peg it down, nail it down as to what it might be. Um Mark saying that's the old Lions BD. Hey, hopefully, right? Like I'm Mark, I'm right there with you. I'm hoping that's the old Lions. I'm hoping they're the team that beats the teams they're supposed to beat. Um it's kind of hard to say that because obviously like there were a couple games last year that, again, in the beginning stretch of the season, games that they should have won, but they didn't. So we'll have to see. Um Tony saying, yeah, I would be worried if I didn't actually see improvements during the learning curve. The Seahawks game and the Panthers game were rough, but we got better. And again, there are things to point to say like, hey, this is why I'm optimistic. This is why you should have expectations. This is why your expectations should be high for the Lions going into this year because they did get better. They did make adjustments. They did um, you know, find ways to improve throughout the season. Um, let's see. Let's see. Josh was saying handily beat the Vikings, Jags, Giants, and Packers. Yeah, I mean, those were some of the playoff teams that they beat last year. Again, I think, well, the Packers would have been if they, if we didn't ruin, their season. But I mean, again, I think the Lions are capable of hanging with some of these teams. I think again, week one against the Chiefs is going to be like the biggest test. And we'll kind of see where they stand from there. Luke saying Hooker will be amazing. Um, like I'm there with you, Luke. I think he has the physical tools, and I think he's in a system that could really lend itself to him being a good quarterback in the NFL. It's just the thing that we don't know is just how well he'll pick up the game mentally. That's the number one thing we're gonna have to see. We're gonna have to see, you know, as he's going through these mental reps, is he retaining everything that he's learning and can he apply it to the field? Because the offense that he's going to run in Detroit is going to be different than what they asked him to do in Tennessee. And the same is true for, again, I say that in regards to Hendon Hooker, but the same is true for any of these rookies, right? They're all going to be asked to do something drastically different than what they did in college. And so it's just a matter of with any of these rookies, how quickly can they adapt? How quickly can they adopt the new things that they're being asked to do? Um, Luke saying, I'm so done with the word potential. Listen, man, until the season starts, that's all we got. Until the season starts, all we have is potential, and what could be is could, would, should. Like, that's all we got. And once the season happens, like, then we can start talking about what is happening and um again how good this team is or isn't. Um Mark saying my season hinges on settling the score with Seattle and the Panthers and sweeping Chicago. I want them to win. Like I don't even know. I think somebody put this on Twitter a couple weeks ago where it was like, what is the one team that you really want the Lions to beat outside? And I think it was like outside of the Chiefs game. And for me, oddly enough, it's the Dallas game. Like I just hate Dallas. I don't necessarily know why. It just feels like just something that like was part of me at birth. I just don't like the Cowboys. Um, and so that's the team for me where it's like I want them to win like obviously as many of their games as they can that'll get them into the playoffs and help them win the division. But for me, it's like please just beat Dallas. Like if nothing else, just beat Dallas. Because seeing sad Cowboy fans is like one of the greatest things on earth. It's probably as good as seeing like sad Bears and Packers fans, but like seeing sad Cowboys fans is just is amazing to me. Um Grit saying I like Hooker too. It's just what would have to happen for him to be our quarterback. I would rather win with Goff than lose just so Hooker can take over. And again, that's a reasonable expectation, right? That's a reasonable ask. My dream scenario is that Jared Goff plays well enough, right? Maybe they don't quite get to the Super Bowl. Maybe they lose a playoff game, and Hendon comes into training camp next year and he just wows in training camp. That's like literally like it would be a situation where like it's not that Jared Goff lost the job, it's that Hendon took it. That's the situation I would like to see play out because I still want this team to win, and I'm not willing to see them. I'm not going to root for them to lose just so that I can see a third round quarterback potentially replace Jared Goff. That's not where I'm not at that point at this stage. Luke saying, hot take, even if Jared Goff wins a playoff game, he should not be re-signed. Like I said, and I think it's a possibility depending on what he asks for. I think if they win a playoff game, I think he'll have that leverage to do so. The thing about Brad Holmes that I've like at least been able to appreciate is that, and he at least flexed it when it came down to like re-signing Jamal, is that like, once they set a cap number for a player, once they allocate a certain number of funds to that player, if that player wants more than what they're willing to give, they're not afraid to go out there and just be like, we'll find somebody that fits what we're willing to pay. And so again, like fortunately, the Lions aren't in a position where they have to re-sign Jared Goff. I think I talked about this about a month ago. I would much rather them sign Jonah. Like Jonah Jackson to me is a much higher priority to re-sign at this current moment than Jared Goff is. And that's, again, without even seeing Jonah play this year, I would much rather re-sign Jonah, mainly for the simple fact that like it would at least guarantee that Jared has a competent and highly productive offensive line in front of him to keep him clean. So if you are expecting Jared Goff to play well, he's going to need that offensive line in front of him. So for me personally, Jonah is a much higher priority. Mark and Grit, agreeing with me. I hate Dallas too. Agreed, hate the Cowboys. Joshua, Cowboys arrogance. It's just for a team that like literally hasn't done anything since again the 90s. Like I hate that fan base so much. And yeah, Joshua, right? Like Cowboys haven't done anything since the 90s, same as us, yet America's team. It's BS, man. Absolute BS. And Luke still going on the Hendon Hooker thing. He has no leverage. We drafted his replacement, and he has another year after this player go. And like I said, I think, like I said, the Pride Detroit guys, I think, have worded it probably the best when they say basically, like, I think the Lions want to re-sign Jared Goff. They would love to do that. They would love to keep him around as long as he's being productive. The minute he's no longer being productive, yeah, they're going to weigh what it costs to retain him. And if that amount goes over what they want to allocate to him, Hendon Hooker is going to be your starting quarterback for the Detroit Lions. Yeah, Tony, I'm serious. I would take Jonah over Goff. Like and again, it's not saying that you can't re-sign Goff. I just think in order of priority, Jonah's more important than Goff at this exact moment for me personally. And then Josh was saying Hooker would be easier to build around. I think he allows a certain level of flexibility, right? Because he's a quarterback that obviously like arm talent is on full display as far as, being able to hit the deep throws and things of that nature. He's mobile, but he's not a running quarterback. So again, I think that's for those people who don't want like a running, like a straight running quarterback. He's not that. He's mobile. He can absolutely pick up yards with his legs in the same way that like Patrick Mahomes can. That's the only Patrick Mahomes comp you're getting from me too, Luke. Like that's the only comp I'm giving Hendon Hooker is that he uses his legs in a similar fashion, but he at least shows that same thing that you like about Jared Goff, and that and this is why I think it's a perfect fit with Hendon in Detroit, is that Hendon Hooker is very much a system quarterback. He functioned very well in Tennessee's system of timing and understanding where the ball had to be and understanding where his receivers were going to be. That's a lot of what Detroit does for Jared Goff, where it's not asking him to freestyle a lot and have to make up stuff on the fly, make up things on the fly. It's this is the play. This is this is how the play is going to unfold. You just need to, hit your drops and your guy is going to be here. You need to just deliver the ball accurately. That plays very well into what Hendon Hooker does really well as a quarterback. the thing that Hendon has to improve upon, and one of the reasons outside of his injury of why he probably fell in the draft is that there's not enough tape of him like reading the entire field. And again, it's because that's not what Tennessee asked him to do. It doesn't mean that he can't do it. Tennessee just didn't ask him to do it. They ran a lot of concepts where the route combination was set up on one side of the field, and they set up things for guys to win, and guys would win early, and he has to deliver the ball. I think there would be a seamless transition for what the Lions would ask him to do, but again, he has to learn the NFL game. He has to get up to speed, all of those things. And yeah, Joshua, right? All that, but he's also cheaper too, right? So you don't have to you get a few years before you have to ever allocate a lot of funds, and they would give you the flexibility to pay a Penei Sewell. It would give you the flexibility to pay an Amon-Ra St. Brown, like what they're worth too, like not just paying them and trying to like have tough negotiations, but just pay them what they're worth and not having to worry about that necessarily crippling your roster for years to come. Thinking that a guard is more valuable than a top 10 quarterback is really insane. It is if you think Jared Goff is a top 10 quarterback. I don't. So that's why I'm able to have that thought process. And Grit, you're right? It really comes down to what Jared Goff is willing to play for. He doesn't strike me as the type of guy that would go into negotiations being like, I need to be the highest paid guy at my position. Unless he wins a playoff game, unless he wins the Super Bowl, then then you're able to ask for that type of stuff. But if he doesn't accomplish those things, I think you would be able to get a fair negotiation out of him. But again, it really comes down to what the Lions value him at. And then Josh was saying, right, how bad does Goff want to win? And that's really what it comes down to, right? He talks about this being one of the best situations he's been in, and we've gotten a lot of insight into how toxic things were in LA. Like, there's no guarantee that you would leave Detroit and find another good situation. Now, I just now thought about this, and this is huge speculation, right? I guess there is a potential scenario where if Ben Johnson were to leave, and maybe Jared Goff is like, I want to go wherever Ben Johnson goes. I don't know how frequently stuff like that happens in the NFL, right? Because again, Jared's in a situation where to Luke's point, he could view it as they drafted his replacement. But Jared could look at the situation being like, you know what? I really want to work with Ben. I want to keep progressing as a quarterback with Ben. And Ben's going to go coach this team, and this team doesn't have a quarterback, and I'm going to go play for that team. It's probably it's probably the most speculation I'll probably do all season. But I don't think it happens. But if there was a situation where Jared Goff, to Joshua's point, Jared Goff doesn't necessarily care about winning. He necessarily cares about working with certain people. And then maybe he chooses to go elsewhere and follow Ben Johnson if Ben Johnson were to ever leave Detroit. What money would be acceptable to pay for Goff? I'm not going to give you an exact number. I will say this. The amount that makes it easy for you to sign Penei Sewell and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Because he needs to have a cap number that makes that easy for you. Because if Amon-Ra St. Brown continues to play at the level he's playing, he's going to demand a nice bag when his contract is up. Especially as a guy who was not making a lot of money as a 4th round pick, he's going to want and is going to deserve a very big bag in that situation. And the same with Penei Sewell. Penei is arguably, just going based off of talent, probably your most talented player on offense between him and Amon-Ra, right? And so when Penei's contract comes up as a top, first round pick in his draft class, or in the same draft class as Amon-Ra, and playing a pivotal position where there's still that potential that he could eventually be your starting left tackle when Taylor decides to hang it up, Penei's going to want a nice contract as well. So whatever Jared Goff asks for, whatever Jared Goff is given, I think it needs to allow the Lions to be able to still one, add pieces, right? Obviously in future free agency classes, but also to be able to retain their top tier players. Specifically looking at Amon Ra and Panay Sewell specifically. So that's going to pretty much do it for today, guys. Yo, I appreciate all the conversation. And okay, I'll have to answer this one because Pride of Detroit just entered the chat, so I gotta acknowledge one off topic. But how mad should I be about Madden ratings? 10 10, 9.5, 11. I'm most upset about the Kirby Joseph rating. I think I think Kirby got shafted, like completely shafted with his rating. So for you guys should be as upset as in the context of like how difficult it's going to make your Madden Sims. Because if it makes your Madden Sims just like make the Lions look terrible, every time you guys run those, then like, yeah, I think you guys should be pretty upset. So I'll give it 11 because Madden Sims are a huge part of what you guys do over at Pride of Detroit. Grit with the POD 100. Karen in the chat saying a 12. Listen, like, see, right? Like, I think there's reasons to be upset about it. CJ got shafted too. But so this is the question I have about CJ. So CJ got rated as a safety, and I think he's primarily going to play nickel. I wonder if his rating goes up if you were to like move him to nickel. If you were to move him to like corner, does his rating go up or does it go down? If it goes down, like Madden needs to fix that ASAP. One Funky Lion fan saying, why do people forget Hooker played at Virginia Tech and they ran a pro system? I'm not worried about Hooker in any system. Recency bias, right? It's the same reason why people don't acknowledge or forget that Jahmyr Gibbs played at Georgia Tech and that he can actually like run in between the tackles because he did do that at Georgia Tech a little bit. It's always like people, and myself included, right? Like obviously I just talked about what he did at Tennessee, didn't acknowledge what he did at Virginia Tech. But it's whatever like is freshest in our mind and wherever a player has the most success as well. Like the success that Hendon Hooker had at Tennessee is drastically better than the success that he had at Virginia Tech. So it's I don't think it's meant to be like outright disrespectful, but I get your point, right? Like he has shown the ability to play in two different styles of offenses. Grit saying Khalif got shafted big time. I think also, I think there's some people that say Amon Ra got shafted. I think Amon Ra was sub 80 as well. So I think that's he also got shafted. Khalif's like wide receiver 4 though. So like how I don't know like what you would expect Khalif to be rated in that context. But on the actual like football field, yeah, Khalif's much better than what he was projected as in Madden. But all right, guys, I'm gonna get out of here. My family just got back. The girls had dance, so family's back. I'm sure my wife did poke her head in here, and she's probably a little shocked that I'm still streaming. But yo, I appreciate you guys coming by. Be sure to hit the like button on your way out. If you are new here, this is your first time ever at the channel, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. I really do appreciate you guys. I will be back on Monday. We'll talk some more training camp. I might even like do some reconning and see if I can get a guest. Had a great time with Ryan last week as a guest. This week I kind of went solo. So let me know what you guys think. Do you guys like it when I have guests on the show? Would you guys prefer it to just be me? Let me know in the comment section, and like I said, I'll try and get those things ironed out for you guys. But yeah, appreciate you guys. Hope you guys have a great night, and I'll see you guys next week. Later.